She left me to raise her 3 kids. After 13 years she accused me of kidnapping. The first crack of the gavel didn't just hit the bench, it hit me. It rolled through the courtroom and settled inside my ribs like a sound I'd been carrying for years. The way you carry a secret until it starts to feel heavier than your own name. I sat very still because moving might make me fall apart. My hands, thin and veined with age, clutched a yellow envelope that had lived in the back of a drawer for 13 years, tucked beneath old receipts and holiday cards that never came from the person who mattered. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. I am Eleanor Vance, 67 years old. My joints ached the way weather changes ache. Predictable, relentless, familiar, but that morning the pain felt far away compared to the pounding in my chest. Across from me sat my daughter, Valerie, polished like a photograph. Tailored suit, perfect hair, lipstick too bright for a room this cold. Beside her was her attorney, Mark Sullivan, his posture relaxed, his file organized, his confidence practiced. Valerie's lawyer wasn't pointing at me with a finger, but the angle of his pen and the set of his jaw did the same thing. He looked at me like I was a problem to solve. Valerie rose when the judge acknowledged her, and when she spoke, her voice trembled in a way that might have sounded like pain to strangers. "Your Honor," she said, "my mother has kept my children from me for 13 years without my consent. This constitutes parental kidnapping. I never authorized her to take them." The word kidnapping landed like a slap. It wasn't just insulting, it was surgical. It cut straight into everything I had done and everything I had lost, and it tried to turn it into a crime. My throat tightened. My eyes found the third row of benches, where Arthur, Emily, and Andrea sat side by side like they were holding each other up without touching. Arthur was 20 now, tall and quiet in the way young men become when they've learned early that noise doesn't fix anything. Emily, 18, stared ahead with the kind of stillness that wasn't calm, it was contained. Andrea, 16, held her arms close to her body as if warmth was something you had to protect. Judge Theodore Mason looked down at me over his glasses. Gray hair, tired eyes, the expression of a man who had seen too many families tear themselves apart while insisting they were doing it for love. His voice was neutral, but not unkind. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "what do you have to say to these accusations?" I felt my fingers squeeze the envelope until the paper threatened to buckle. The envelope wasn't dramatic. It wasn't pretty. It was ordinary the way truth often is. Plain and stubborn, waiting. I swallowed, tasting the dryness of fear. "Your Honor," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted at first. "I didn't kidnap anyone. I raised the children my daughter left behind." "That's a lie." Valerie shot up so fast her chair scraped. Her composure cracked, and rage flashed through it like lightning. "I never abandoned them. I had mental health issues. I needed temporary help." Her lawyer lifted a calming hand toward her, then addressed the bench smoothly. "Your Honor, my client suffered from severe postpartum depression and required medical intervention. Mrs. Vance took advantage of that vulnerable period and alienated the children from their biological mother." A murmur slid across the room. Strangers leaned forward as if they were watching a story with clear villains and victims. I could feel judgments being formed, stacked like bricks, built from one word, depression, then reinforced by another, kidnapping. I didn't hate those people for it. Most of them had never lived through the long quiet of raising 3 children with a pension that barely stretched to groceries, while waiting for a phone call that never came. Most of them had never learned the difference between a mother who needs help and a mother who disappears. Judge Mason tapped his gavel once, not hard, just enough to bring the air back under his control. "Mrs. Vance," he said more gently, "caring for your grandchildren must have been difficult. But if the biological mother is requesting custody—" "With all due respect, Your Honor," I interrupted, surprising even myself with the firmness that came out, "there are things this court needs to know before it decides anything." I raised the yellow envelope slightly. Not high like a weapon, not shaking like a surrender, just present, undeniable. Valerie's eyes widened. For the first time since she'd walked in, Something like fear slid into her face and made her look less like a lawyer's client and more like my daughter again. The judge leaned forward. "What kind of documents, Mrs. Vance?" "Proof," I said. The word steadied me. "Proof of what actually happened 13 years ago. Proof of why my daughter is here today, after 13 years of silence." Sullivan cleared his throat. "Your Honor, this is an attempt to distract from the legal issue. Whatever papers she has don't change the fact that my client has rights as the biological mother." I turned my head slowly, meeting his eyes without flinching. "They explain why we're here," I said. "They explain why, after 13 years of no visits, no calls, no child support, no Christmas cards, no birthdays, my daughter suddenly shows up with a lawyer and a kidnapping accusation." Valerie's voice dropped into something softer, almost pleading. "Mom," she said, "please don't do this." "Do what?" I asked, and the sadness in my voice surprised me. "Tell the truth." Judge Mason's gaze didn't leave me. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "are you suggesting hidden motives?" "I'm not suggesting," I replied. "I'm starting." The courtroom grew quiet in that way it does before something breaks. I could hear paper shifting, the faint click of a pen, someone swallowing. Behind me, I sensed my grandchildren holding their breath, their entire lives balanced on words. The judge sat back slightly. "Before we address the documents," he said, "I want your full account. Tell the court what happened 13 years ago." I closed my eyes for a second, not to avoid the room but to step past it. Memory doesn't arrive politely. It comes like the weather. It comes like a door knocking you open. "It was a rainy Tuesday," I began, and my voice softened the way it always did when I returned there. "October. I remember because my hands were aching that day, and I'd just come home from a doctor who told me my arthritis was getting worse. I was making chamomile tea, trying to calm myself, when I heard knocking. I opened my eyes and saw my grandchildren watching me with faces that didn't look like children anymore, but still carried the same old questions. It was near noon," I continued. "When I opened the door, Valerie was standing there with the children." Valerie's chin lifted like she was bracing for impact. "Arthur was 7, I said. Emily was 5, and Andrea was barely 3. They looked tired. Their clothes were wrinkled. Their faces were dirty. Andrea was crying. Emily's hair was tangled. Arthur's shoes." I stopped, swallowing hard. Arthur's shoes had holes in the soles. The judge's pen moved steadily. "Valerie walked into my house like a storm," I said. "She had a plastic bag with clothes, some of the children's things, all mixed up, not folded, not clean. She said, 'Mom, I need you to keep them for a while. Just a few weeks. I'll sort out my problems.'" I glanced at Valerie. For a moment her eyes dropped, and I knew she remembered too. "I asked her what problems," I continued. "I asked if she needed money. I asked if something happened with the children's father. She kept repeating that she'd be back soon. She kissed them quickly, like she was checking a box, and left." My voice tightened as I pictured it. The children ran to the window shouting for her. But she was already in a taxi. Gone. No one in the courtroom spoke. Even the people who had been whispering earlier seemed to have run out of air. "That night," I said, "Arthur asked me when his mom was coming back. I told him soon because I believed it. Andrea cried for a teddy bear she'd left behind. Emily helped me make dinner with her little hands like she understood, somehow, that the adults had shifted and she didn't have a choice." I paused to take a sip of water offered by the bailiff, because my throat had become sandpaper. "Days passed," I said. Then weeks. I didn't know where Valerie was living. She'd moved. The phone number I had didn't work. The children asked about her every day. Arthur started wetting the bed. Emily stopped talking for weeks. Andrea developed a cough that wouldn't go away. Valerie shifted in her seat. Her hands worried at a ring like she was trying to twist time backward. Judge Mason lifted his head. Did you report this to authorities? At first, no, I answered honestly. Your Honor, I thought it was temporary. Valerie had struggled before, but she'd never fully disappeared. And at that moment, what crime was there? A mother left her children with their grandmother. That happens. Families do that when they're trying to survive. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. But months passed. Then years. I looked at Arthur, and his face tightened as if he could feel the birthdays I was about to list. Arthur turned 8, I said. He asked if he could invite his mom to his party. Emily started school. When a teacher asked who her parents were, she pointed to me and said, "This is my mom." Something hot pricked behind my eyes, but I forced it down. This wasn't the time to fall apart. My pension was small, I continued. It covered me. It didn't cover 3 children. I sold jewelry I'd saved. I cleaned houses on weekends. A neighbor watched the kids when I worked. Judge Mason's pen paused. The neighbor's name? Elmer Jensen, I answered. The judge's eyes flicked up. Any relation? She's your sister, I said, and a ripple went through the room. Not amusement, surprise. The judge nodded slowly, as if that detail tightened something in his mind. Continue. When Andrea got pneumonia, I said, we had to take her to the hospital. They asked for insurance, parental authorization, and documents I didn't have. That's when I realized love wasn't enough. I needed legal permission to do what I was already doing. Sullivan straightened slightly, as if preparing to object, but I kept going before he could. I hired a lawyer with money I didn't have, I said. We filed for temporary guardianship. The court required notice to the biological parent. The lawyer tried to locate Valerie. We published notices. No one responded. Judge Mason asked, "And the court granted you guardianship?" "Yes," I said. 10 years ago, this court granted me legal guardianship of Arthur, Emily, and Andrea. Valerie made a sound, half sob, half protest, but the judge's gaze cut toward her. Not once, I continued, did Valerie show up. Not once did she call the court, call me, call the school. Not once did she send money. Not once did she ask if they were alive. The silence became heavy enough to feel like pressure on my skin. The children grew, I said. Arthur worked hard. Emily wrote poems. Andrea played guitar. They went to the doctors. They went to school. They went through nightmares and growing pains and heartbreaks. I was there. I didn't pretend I was perfect. But I was there. Judge Mason's voice softened. Did the children have contact with their biological mother during those years? No, I said. Not once. Until 2 months ago, when she appeared at my door with a lawyer and a custody demand. The judge leaned forward. 2 months ago. Why now? My fingers found the edge of the yellow envelope again. The paper felt warmer now, like it had been waiting for this moment. That answer, I said quietly, is in these documents. Judge Mason nodded toward the clerk. Mrs. Vance, approach and present the envelope. The documents will be reviewed by both parties. I stood slowly, my knees protesting, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of finally setting the truth down in a room where it couldn't be dismissed as my imagination. I walked to the front, the envelope tight against my chest as though it could protect me from the past. I opened it carefully, like opening a wound you've kept clean for years. Photographs. Letters. Receipts. Printed messages. Paper that had outlasted excuses. I'd like to begin with these, I said, sliding a small bundle of photos forward. The judge studied them one by one. His expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough that I saw his professionalism give way to something human. Describe what we're seeing, he instructed. The first photo is Arthur, I said. Dirty clothes. Torn shirt. Shoes with holes. The second is Emily. Food dried on her face, hair tangled. The third is Andrea. She was still in a diaper that hadn't been changed for hours. Valerie covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes squeezed shut, as if refusing to see. Sullivan took the photos when they reached him. His confidence thinned slightly around the edges, like paper held too close to flame. "Why did you take these photos?" Judge Mason asked. "A neighbor who was a nurse told me to," I said. "Not because I wanted to punish Valerie. Because she said, 'Eleanor, you need to document what you're dealing with. For the children. For yourself.'" Then I pulled out the letters, handwritten pages folded and refolded until the creases were permanent. "These are letters Valerie wrote during the first 6 months," I said. The judge looked at the handwriting. "This appears to be your daughter's script." "It is," I said. "I'd know it anywhere." Valerie didn't deny it. She couldn't. She just stared at the table like it might open and swallow her. Judge Mason nodded to Sullivan. "Counsel, review." Sullivan read the first letter, and I watched his face change in real time, the way a person's expression changes when a story stops matching what they were told. His lips parted slightly. He glanced at Valerie, then back to the page, like he was checking whether reality had shifted without him. I spoke into the quiet. In the first letter, dated 3 weeks after she left the children, Valerie wrote that she had met a man and was moving to another city. She asked me to keep the children longer because, in her words, her new partner didn't want immediate family responsibilities. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Small, sharp, immediate. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do the letters continue?" "Yes," I said, and my voice steadied because by then the truth had started to stand on its own. In another letter she said she was pregnant with his child. She wrote that she couldn't return because he threatened to leave her if she brought burdens from the past into their life. Arthur's head snapped up at that. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Andrea's eyes widened, startled like a door opening onto a room she never knew existed. "They didn't know," I said softly, more to the judge than to the room. "I didn't tell them." The judge's gaze stayed on me, but his tone carried the gravity of what was unfolding. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "what is the court about to learn that even the children don't know?" The envelope felt suddenly lighter, as if it had been waiting for this question. I took a careful breath, because part 1 of my story was ending, and the next part would change the room entirely. "There is more," I said. "And it explains everything about why she returned now." The room didn't just get quiet, it got careful. Everyone suddenly understood that whatever came next wasn't going to be a simple argument about custody or a misunderstanding about a grandmother helping too long. It was going to be something sharper, something that couldn't be packed back into a legal folder once spoken aloud. I kept my eyes on the yellow envelope as if it were a compass. My fingers moved through the stack inside until I found the next letter, the one written on thin paper with the ink pressed hard, like Valerie had been angry when she wrote it. I didn't read the whole thing out loud. I didn't have to. The court didn't need drama. It needed facts. "Your Honor," I said, looking up at Judge Mason, "these letters show that Valerie was not trying to recover from a brief crisis and return to her children. She was starting a different life." Attorney Sullivan's mouth tightened, but he didn't interrupt. His eyes kept flicking down to the handwriting as if he couldn't stop verifying that it was real. "In this letter," I continued, "she asks me to keep the children longer because she wants to settle in first. She says she will figure out what to do about them later." And then, I paused, because this part still hurts even after all these years. She tells me not to contact her unless it's an emergency because she doesn't want her new partner to think she comes with complications. Valerie's shoulders trembled. Her face was turned slightly away from the audience, but I could see her eyes wet and wide, the way a child's eyes look when they're caught and can't run. Still, the tears didn't undo what she wrote. Tears never erase ink. Judge Mason leaned forward. "Mrs. Vance, did you respond?" "Yes," I answered. I wrote back. I told her I didn't want her money. I didn't want a bargain. I wanted her to come back and be a mother if she could, and if she couldn't, then she needed to stop creating confusion. Children can survive hard truths. What they can't survive is constant hope with no follow-through. Sullivan lifted his hand slightly, and I saw him hesitate, like he wanted to object but didn't know what exactly he could object to when the evidence was written by his own client. I reached deeper into the envelope and pulled out one page. Creased, worn at the folds, a letter I had read so many times I could hear it even without looking at it. "This is her last letter to me," I said quietly. "The final communication we had before 13 years of silence." Judge Mason nodded to the clerk. "Provide it." The clerk carried it forward, and the judge read it without moving his face. His expression stayed disciplined until he reached the end, and then something changed, subtle but unmistakable. His jaw tightened. His eyes held a heavier focus. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "can you summarize what this letter states?" I swallowed. "She told me she wouldn't bother us anymore," I said. "She told me to take good care of the children because she had her own family now. And she instructed me, if anyone asked, to tell the children their mother went away for work." The word work made a few heads tilt in disbelief. That's how lies always sound when they're revealed. Ordinary words become unbelievable. Valerie made a small sound, like her throat had closed. Her lawyer leaned close and whispered something, but she didn't answer him. She didn't look at anyone. She stared at the table the way people stare at the ground when they're afraid it might collapse. Arthur, my grandson, shifted in his seat like a man trying to hold himself together without making a scene. Emily's eyes were glassy. Andrea's lips pressed into a thin line, and her hands balled into fists in her lap. Their pain moved through me like electricity, but I held my posture. I couldn't protect them by hiding the truth anymore. The hiding was what had brought us here. Judge Mason cleared his throat. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "if your daughter ceased contact voluntarily, why did you not pursue termination of parental rights sooner?" "Because I was still a mother to her, too," I thought. Because a mother doesn't stop loving her child just because her child does something unforgivable. But what I said was simpler. Because courtrooms don't run on emotion. They run on reasoning. "Your Honor," I replied, "I hoped she would come back for the right reasons. I didn't want to make the door permanently disappear. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that time would mature her. And in the meantime, I did what the children needed. When the hospital demanded authorization and I had none, that's when I sought guardianship." The judge nodded once, as if acknowledging the complexity without excusing negligence. Then he asked the question that forced the story to turn. "And what changed 2 months ago?" he said. "What made her return?" My fingers found another paper in the envelope. Not handwritten. Typed. Formal. The kind of paper that doesn't exist unless money is involved. I didn't look at Valerie when I spoke. I looked at my grandchildren instead, because they deserved honesty in the direction of my voice. "My brother," I said, "passed away 3 months ago." Judge Mason's pen moved. "Your brother?" "Yes," I said. "Arthur Vance. He lived in Texas. He had no children of his own." Arthur, my grandson, flinched slightly at hearing the name. "We named him after my brother, after a man who had sent birthday cards and small gifts even when I couldn't afford them. A man who loved those children from a distance like a steady light." Judge Mason's voice remained cautious. "And what does your brother's death have to do with this custody dispute?" "Everything," I thought. "It has everything to do with it. It has to do with the inheritance he left," I said. The word inheritance dropped into the courtroom like a stone. Heavy. Final. It made people sit forward without meaning to, because money is the one force that can turn long silence into sudden action. "My brother left money to each of the children," I continued. "A sum set aside for Arthur, for Emily, for Andrea. It was meant as a gift for their adulthood, education, housing, stability. Something to make their beginnings easier than ours." Valerie's lawyer's face tightened as if someone had pulled a string behind his neck. He glanced at his client quickly, and I watched him realize in that glance that he had been given only part of her truth. Arthur's eyes widened. Emily's mouth parted in shock. Andrea stared at me like she didn't recognize the world. "You didn't tell us," Arthur whispered, not loudly enough for the judge but loud enough for me to feel it. I held his gaze for a second and gave him the smallest nod that said, "Later. We will talk later." Judge Mason's tone sharpened. "What is the amount?" I hesitated, not because I wanted to hide it, but because speaking numbers in a room like this always turns human lives into math. $50,000 for each child, I said. A breath moved through the courtroom. Some people made sounds they didn't mean to make. Judge Mason lifted his eyes toward Valerie. "Mrs. Vance," he asked, "were you aware of this inheritance?" Valerie's lips trembled. She didn't answer fast enough. Her lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, relevance." "It is relevant if motive is being alleged," Judge Mason cut in, calm but firm. "Answer the question." Valerie's voice came out thin. I found out recently." Recently. The word was slippery. Recently could mean yesterday. Recently could mean 2 months ago, the same time she showed up at my door with threats. I reached into the envelope again and removed a few pages. Printouts, neat, official. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. "Your Honor," I said. "I hired a licensed private investigator after Valerie appeared with a lawyer and accused me of kidnapping. I did it to protect the children, not to harm my daughter." Sullivan rose, face pale now. "Objection. Private investigations can be invasive and speculative." Judge Mason held up one hand without looking away from me. "Overruled for the purpose of preliminary review. The court will decide admissibility after examining." I handed the papers to the clerk. My hands were steady now. They had been shaking earlier from fear. Now they were steady from necessity. "The investigator's report," I said, "shows that 2.5 months ago, Valerie contacted attorney Mark Sullivan. Within days, she began making inquiries connected to my brother's estate." Sullivan's eyes snapped down toward the pages as they passed him, and the change in his face was instant. He wasn't just nervous anymore. He was startled, and not in a way a man pretends to be when he's performing for a jury. This was real. Judge Mason read silently for a moment, then looked up again. "Mrs. Vance," he asked me, "are you claiming that the custody request is primarily motivated by access to the inheritance?" "I'm not claiming," I said, my voice low but clear. "I'm stating what the timeline shows." Valerie's face crumpled, and her voice rose in desperation. "That money belongs to my children." "It does," I said, turning toward her. "And it's safe. It's set aside. It's not a prize to fight over. It's not a rescue rope for adult problems." Judge Mason tapped the gavel once. "Order." He leaned forward again, eyes narrowed, posture alert. "Mrs. Vance," he said to me, "you said earlier there was something even your grandchildren do not know. Is that connected to inheritance?" My throat tightened again, not from fear now, but from the moment I had delayed for years. I had protected that last paper like you protect something you know will break hearts the moment it enters daylight. "Yes," I said. I could feel all 3 of my grandchildren staring at me from behind. Their gaze wasn't accusing, but it was intense. They were waiting. They deserved the truth even if it hurt. Judge Mason's voice was careful. "Before you present it, do you have any witness who can confirm your account of the children's arrival and the abandonment?" "Yes," I answered. "Mrs. Elmer Jensen. Your sister. She watched the children. She saw my condition. She saw what I had to do to keep them stable. And she knows Valerie never came back." The judge's expression tightened for a second. Complicated, personal, but still professional. "Very well," he said. "The court will hear her if necessary." Valerie's lawyer whispered urgently to her. She shook her head, eyes wet, shoulders tense. She looked like she wanted to disappear, but she was trapped by her own paperwork. Judge Mason's gaze returned to me. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "present the remaining document you referenced. The court will decide its weight." The entire room seemed to lean forward at once. Even the air felt different, heavier, as if it knew what paper could do. My fingers slid to the bottom of the envelope, where the last sheet waited, yellowed at the edges, folded so many times the creases had turned permanent. I pulled it out slowly. Valerie's face drained of color so fast it looked unreal, like someone had turned down the brightness in her skin. Her mouth opened, and for a moment no sound came out. Just breath. Your Honor, I said, holding the paper between both hands so it wouldn't tremble. This is a voluntary statement written and signed by my daughter 3 days after she left the children at my home. Judge Mason rose slightly in his chair, attention sharpening. A statement of what nature? I looked toward my grandchildren, because this was the moment their childhood story changed shape forever. A renunciation of parental rights, I said. The courtroom exploded into whispers, shock, disbelief, the sound people make when they realize this simple story is dead. Valerie made a strangled sob. No, I didn't. Judge Mason's gavel cracked again. Order. He looked at me with a seriousness that stripped away every earlier assumption. Mrs. Vance, he said, hand it to the clerk. Counsel will review. The court will examine the authenticity and context. I walked forward and placed the document in the clerk's hands as if placing something sacred on an altar. It felt like setting down the last piece of a puzzle that no one wanted completed. Sullivan took the paper when it reached him. He read the first line, and his face went so pale that I thought for a second he might sit down without meaning to. His lips moved soundlessly as he scanned it again. Judge Mason's voice was firm. Counsel, read it into the record. Sullivan swallowed. His voice came out uneven, stripped of confidence. I, Valerie Vance, he read, 26 years of age, hereby voluntarily relinquish all rights as mother of Arthur Vance, 7, Emily Vance, 5, Andrea Vance, 3. My grandchildren's faces changed in real time, like a door had been kicked open inside them. Arthur's jaw clenched. Emily's eyes filled instantly. Andrea blinked hard, as if tears were something she refused to give easily. Sullivan continued, voice tightening. I acknowledge I do not have the emotional, economic, or psychological capacity to raise them. I authorize my mother, Eleanor Vance, to make all legal, medical, and educational decisions. I waive any right to contact, visit, or claim them in the future. This decision is definitive and irrevocable. Valerie let out a sound that wasn't a word. It was the raw noise of a person collapsing internally. I was sick, she cried. I didn't know what I was doing. I was mentally ill. Judge Mason struck the gavel. Order. Mrs. Vance, compose yourself. He looked at me. Mrs. Vance, he asked, do you have anyone who can testify that this document was written voluntarily by your daughter? Yes, I said. The landlord of the apartment she left. Paula Sterling. Valerie asked her for paper and a pen to write what she called an important letter. The landlord can testify that Valerie was coherent and conscious. Sullivan's hands trembled slightly as he held the document. He looked at Valerie like he was seeing her for the first time. Judge Mason took a long breath. Then his eyes sharpened again, turning the page of the case into something darker. Mrs. Vance, he said to me, you also mentioned threats. Do you have evidence of that? Yes, I answered. I reached into the envelope and pulled out printed pages, text messages, time-stamped, direct. I handed them to the clerk. My daughter called me a week ago for the first time in 13 years, I said, and the room shifted again, surprise rolling through it. During that call, she claimed she wanted the children back. When I asked why now, she avoided the question. Then I mentioned the inheritance. I paused because my next words were the kind that make mothers feel like they are betraying their own blood even when they are defending children. She told me, I continued, that if I didn't voluntarily transfer custody and control of the inheritance, she would accuse me of kidnapping. She said a judge would always believe a biological mother. Arthur rose halfway from his seat. Grandma, why didn't you tell us? Sit down, Judge Mason instructed him gently but firmly. Then he faced me again. Mrs. Vance, he said, read the messages that reflect that threat. My voice didn't shake now. It couldn't afford to. Message dated July 18th, I read. Mom, think carefully. I'm the biological mother. Any judge will side with me. Don't make this hard. I turned the page. Message dated July 20th. I've been talking to my lawyer. What you did could be considered parental kidnapping. You could go to jail. And the last one felt like poison in my mouth. Message dated July 22nd. If you give me custody voluntarily, we can reach an agreement on the inheritance. 50-50. You keep half for raising them. I keep half because I'm their mother. If you force trial, I get everything. Judge Mason's eyes stayed on the paper as if he could burn holes through it. Then he lifted his gaze to Valerie. Mrs. Valerie Vance, he said, do you deny sending these messages? Valerie couldn't speak. She sobbed, head down, shoulders shaking. Sullivan looked like a man trying to decide whether he still believed his client or whether belief was even possible anymore. Judge Mason exhaled slowly. This court will take a brief recess to review the evidence presented so far, he said. 30 minutes. The gavel fell again, and the courtroom shifted into movement, but it didn't feel lighter. It felt charged, like the moment after lightning before thunder finishes rolling away. People stood. Lawyers gathered papers. But I stayed seated, my purse against my chest like armor, my knees weak from more than age. Then my grandchildren approached me. They didn't speak at first. They just surrounded me, arms closing around my shoulders, my back, my hands. Their embrace wasn't delicate. It was desperate, as if they were holding on to the one constant they had ever known. Grandma, Andrea whispered, voice tight, why didn't you tell us she wrote that? I stroked her hair like I did when she was little. Because I didn't want you to grow up with hate, I said. I wanted you to make your own choices when you were older. Arthur's voice broke. But you told us she might come back. I hoped, I said softly. Hope isn't always a lie. Sometimes it's just a way to keep children from breaking. Emily sat beside me and stared at the floor like it had become unfamiliar. So the money, she began. Yes, I admitted. That's part of why she returned. Andrea leaned closer. Is she really our mother? The question was so raw it felt like it tore through the room. She gave birth to you, I said gently. That's biology. But mothering is what happens every day. And you know who did that. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with low voices, but inside our small circle everything felt quiet again, like our own private storm. That's when I sensed Valerie approaching. I looked up and saw her stepping toward us with hesitant, broken movements. She wasn't polished anymore. She looked small, drained, like her strength had been wrung out by the papers she couldn't argue with. Sullivan tried to catch her arm, whispering urgently, but she shrugged him off. Mom, she said, voice shaking, can we talk privately? The way she said it wasn't courtroom Valerie. It was Valerie. The one who used to come to me when she'd done something wrong and didn't know how to fix it. I stood slowly, my joints protesting, and followed her a few steps away so my grandchildren wouldn't have to hear everything. But they stayed close enough to watch, close enough to protect themselves. Valerie's eyes were red. I made mistakes, she whispered. But I've changed. I really have. I held her gaze. Have you changed? I asked. Or do you just need the money? Her face crumpled. She didn't deny it. That alone was an answer. Both, she admitted, voice barely audible. I need the money. But I missed them. Missed them. My voice rose, not loud, but sharp enough to cut. Valerie, you had 13 years to miss them. 13 years to call. To write. To ask if they were sick, if they were safe, if they still remembered your face. She flinched as if each year was a blow. I was scared, she said. Then why now? I asked. Why now, with a lawyer? Valerie pressed her back against the wall like she needed it to stand. Because Javier said if I didn't try to get them and the inheritance back, he'd leave me. I stared at her. For a moment, I saw the pattern so clearly it made me tired. So, I said, voice low with grief, you haven't changed at all. 13 years ago you made a decision because of what a man wanted. Today you're doing the same thing. It's not that simple, she pleaded. You don't know the pressure. I know you, I cut in softly. And I know this is about survival through control, not about love. Valerie lifted her chin suddenly, and there it was, the old Valerie again, the calculating edge that always appeared when she felt cornered. That paper isn't notarized, she said, voice quick, almost defensive. It wasn't filed. It doesn't have full legal validity. The way she said validity told me exactly what she had been thinking about. Not the children. Not their pain. Paperwork. Loopholes. My stomach tightened, but my voice stayed steady. So you're here to win, I said. Not to heal. Valerie's eyes filled again. Mom, what do I have to do for you to forgive me? The question hit me harder than I expected. Forgiveness was something I had wrestled with in the quiet nights after fevers and school meetings and empty holidays. I exhaled slowly. I forgave the scared young woman you were, I said. I forgave the overwhelmed mother who didn't know how to cope. Her face softened with hope. But I cannot forgive, I continued, a grown woman who returns only when money is involved. I cannot forgive threats. And I cannot allow you to hurt them again. The bailiff's voice called out from the courtroom doorway. The recess was ending. The judge was ready. Valerie looked at me like she was drowning. If I withdraw, she whispered quickly, will you let me see them? Sometimes. Supervised. I looked past her to my grandchildren, watching, guarded, older than they should have had to be. Then I looked back at my daughter. That isn't my decision, I said. It's theirs. If they ever want it. On their terms. We walked back into the courtroom, and the air felt heavier than before, because now the court wasn't just deciding custody. It was looking at something that resembled extortion, deception, and a 13-year absence wrapped in legal language. Judge Mason sat, eyes sharp and tired. Valerie returned to her seat, posture slumped, like the fight had leaked out of her. After reviewing the documentation, the judge began, voice solemn. This case contains elements that go beyond a typical custody dispute. He looked directly at Valerie. Mrs. Valerie Vance, I have serious questions. Valerie stood, trembling. Do you confirm you wrote the renunciation dated October 15, 2011? The judge asked. Sullivan jumped in. Your Honor, my client was in a mental health crisis. Judge Mason raised a hand. Counsel, I reviewed the medical records you submitted. They show discharge from treatment 2 months prior. The physician's notes indicate stability at that time. Valerie looked as if the floor had vanished beneath her. The judge continued, tone tightening. Additionally, public records show you legally married Mr. Javier Dawson on December 20, 2011. Explain how you were incapable of decisions regarding your children, yet capable of entering marriage. Valerie's lips moved, but no words came. And then the judge added another detail like a final weight. I also note records indicating you have been an active parent to a child born in 2012, he said. School involvement. Meetings attended. Stability maintained. That suggests capacity existed. Valerie broke into sobs again. Judge Mason lifted the printed messages. These threats, he said, are profoundly concerning. Threatening false accusations to gain control of money can constitute extortion. Sullivan stood abruptly. Your Honor, I request a recess to consult with my client about withdrawing. Counsel, Judge Mason said firmly, given this evidence, I may be obligated to refer this matter for review by the appropriate office. Valerie cried out. No, please, I just wanted my children back. The judge's gaze didn't soften. The evidence suggests otherwise. Then he turned to me. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, he said, do you wish to pursue criminal charges related to these threats? The question lodged in my throat like a stone. Because at that moment, the court wasn't asking about paperwork anymore. It was asking whether I was willing to send my own daughter into consequences that could destroy what little was left of her life. Valerie looked at me with pleading eyes, the same eyes she had as a child when she'd been afraid of punishment and more afraid of abandonment. My grandchildren stared too, not begging, not pushing, just waiting, because this was also about what kind of family we were going to be after this ended. I inhaled slowly, and then I spoke. Your Honor, I said, voice steady, I do not wish to file criminal charges. Valerie's body sagged with relief, until I continued. But I do request a restraining order, I said, prohibiting Valerie from contacting me or the children for a period of 5 years unless through lawful process and with court approval. Judge Mason nodded once. That is a reasonable request. And, I added, because this was the protection the children needed most, I request it be stated on record that she voluntarily relinquished her rights, and that any future attempt to reclaim custody without substantial change be treated as legally frivolous. Judge Mason's pen moved. Granted. Valerie's voice rose. Desperate. You can't take them from me forever. I turned toward her, and my voice came out softer than anyone expected, but it didn't bend. Valerie, I said, I'm not taking anything. You let them go. I'm simply protecting what you left behind. The judge called the next phase of the hearing to order, and I felt the room preparing for the final collapse of Valerie's case. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because my grandchildren, now adults and nearly adults, still had their voices. And the court, for the first time, was listening to them not as children caught in a dispute, but as witnesses to the life they actually lived. When Judge Mason called the room back to order, the air didn't feel like air anymore. It felt like a held breath. Valerie sat with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles looked white. Mark Sullivan had stopped looking confident and started looking careful, the way lawyers look when they realize they walked into a case wearing someone else's version of the truth. The judge's eyes moved across the courtroom, then returned to my grandchildren. The court has heard testimony from Mrs. Vance, he said, and the court has reviewed documentation that raises serious questions about motive and history. Before I finalize any decision regarding guardianship and future contact, I will hear from the children who are old enough to speak for themselves. Valerie lifted her head, and for the briefest second, hope flickered across her face. It wasn't bright, but it was there. The kind of hope that appears when someone believes biology will outrank memory. Judge Mason looked toward Arthur first. Arthur Vance, he said. Approach the stand. Arthur stood slowly. The movement wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate, like he was stepping into something he had avoided thinking about for years. He walked with calm control, but when he reached the stand and placed a hand on the edge of the wooden railing, I saw the tremor in his fingers. Pain hides in young people until it has to speak. Judge Mason's voice softened slightly. Arthur, he said, you are 20. You are an adult. You understand the weight of your words. Tell me what you remember about the time you came to live with your grandmother. Arthur swallowed. He glanced at Valerie once, quickly, not cruelly, the way you glance at a stranger whose face you recognize from old photographs. I remember confusion, he began. I remember not knowing when things would happen, when we'd eat, when we'd sleep, when Mom would stop crying. I remember sometimes the cupboards were empty. I remember my grandma, Eleanor, showing up with bags of groceries even before we moved in with her. His voice didn't shake, but it grew heavier. And I remember the day we arrived at her house. I remember being bathed. I remember clean clothes. I remember chicken soup. I remember warmth. It felt like stepping out of a storm. Valerie's shoulders rose and fell, trembling. Judge Mason nodded slowly. Did your grandmother ever tell you your mother didn't love you? Arthur's gaze sharpened, And he shook his head immediately. "No, Your Honor," he said. "She never said that. She always said Mom loved us but couldn't take care of us. She made excuses for her. She didn't have to. But she did." I felt something twist in my chest, a mix of pride and sorrow. Judge Mason asked, "How did your mother's absence affect you?" Arthur's eyes moved down for a moment, then up again. "For a long time I was angry," he admitted. "I didn't understand. Kids assume everything is their fault. I thought maybe we weren't good enough." The courtroom stayed so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the lights. "I'd watch my friends' parents show up," Arthur continued. "Pick them up from school. Attend games. Help with homework. I didn't have that. I had my grandmother. And she worked hard, too hard, to make sure we didn't feel like we were missing something. But you can't replace a question that never gets answered." Valerie covered her mouth. Tears slipped down her face. Judge Mason leaned forward slightly. "And now?" he asked. "Now that your biological mother is requesting custody or contact?" Arthur took a slow breath. When he spoke, his tone was mature, careful, but it carried a blade of truth. "Your Honor," he said, "I'm glad to know she's alive. I'm glad to know she got through whatever she went through. But I can't pretend 13 years didn't happen. I can't pretend it doesn't hurt that she built another family while we grew up wondering why we weren't worth a phone call." Valerie let out a sound like she'd been punched. Judge Mason asked, "If the court permitted contact, what would you want?" Arthur's voice steadied more. "I'm an adult. I make my own choices. But I'm here because my sisters are younger, and what happens to them matters. If my words can protect them, then I'll say it plainly." He turned his head slightly, not toward me, but toward the court, as if he was placing his truth on the record like a document. "My home is with my grandmother," Arthur said. "She raised us. She loved us. She stayed." Judge Mason's gaze lingered on him for a second, then softened. "Thank you," he said. "You may return to your seat." Arthur stepped down and walked back with a measured calm, but when he passed me, he reached out and squeezed my shoulder briefly. It wasn't for comfort, it was for connection, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. Then the judge called Emily. Emily stood with that quiet grace she'd always carried, but I could see the tension in her posture. Emily had been the one who learned to read people early, the one who survived by understanding moods and predicting explosions. She walked to the stand like she was stepping into cold water. Judge Mason spoke gently. "Emily, you are 18. Tell the court what you remember." Emily looked directly at the judge, but her voice carried a quiet intensity. "Your Honor, I remember Mom crying," she said. "A lot. I remember her staying in bed. I remember trying to be quiet because noise made things worse." Valerie made a small protest sound, but the judge's stern glance silenced her. Emily continued. "I remember being hungry. I remember feeling like we were always in trouble even when we didn't know what we did. And then I remember arriving at Grandma Eleanor's house." Her eyes flicked toward me, and something softened there. "For the first time in a long time," Emily said, "someone asked us if we had eaten. Someone read to us. Someone tucked us in. Someone told us we were safe." Judge Mason's pen moved steadily. "Did your grandmother ever prevent contact with your biological mother?" Emily shook her head. "No," she said. "She didn't hide her. She didn't poison us. She didn't make us hate her. She made us hope for her, even when she shouldn't have." That line struck the room like a bell. Even Sullivan blinked, as if he'd heard something that didn't fit his argument. Judge Mason asked, "And what do you want now? If the court allowed your mother to regain custody or have access?" Emily's jaw tightened. "Your Honor," she said, "my biological mother is a stranger. She shares my DNA, but she didn't share my childhood. Grandma did. Grandma shared my illness scares, my school events, my nightmares." She swallowed. When I was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes, Grandma learned everything. She didn't panic and disappeared. She stayed. That's what a parent does. Valerie's tears became louder, but Emily didn't stop. So my answer is simple, Emily said. I want to stay with Grandma. Contact with Valerie should be my choice someday, not forced by a court order. Judge Mason nodded. Thank you, Emily. Emily returned to her seat, and when she sat, Andrea's hand found hers. The two girls didn't speak. They didn't have to. Their fingers locked like a promise. Then Judge Mason called Andrea. Andrea rose with a fire that always lived inside her, even as a child. She was the one who asked hard questions. The one who didn't let silence be mistaken for peace. At 16, she walked to the stand with her shoulders squared, but her eyes, those eyes carried fear too. Not fear of Valerie exactly. Fear of being left again. Judge Mason's tone was kind. Andrea, he said, tell the court what you remember. Andrea's voice came out steady at first, then softened around the edges. I was little, she said. But I remember feelings. I remember hunger. I remember crying and nobody coming. Valerie folded inward in her chair. I remember the smell, Andrea continued, and the room tightened. That house smelled like sadness. Like people giving up. She paused and took a breath like she was choosing which memories deserved to be spoken. But I also remember the first night at Grandma Eleanor's house, Andrea said. Warm bath. Clean pajamas. Milk with honey. A lullaby. My throat tightened. I hadn't sung that lullaby in years. I hadn't thought she remembered. Judge Mason asked, would you like to get to know your biological mother now? Andrea's eyes shifted toward Valerie. They were not cruel. They were honest. I'm curious, Andrea admitted. Because she's part of my story. But I'm also scared. Scared she'll leave again. Scared her promises are like they were before. And where do you feel safest? Judge Mason asked. Andrea didn't hesitate. With my grandma, she said. She has never failed me. She has never disappeared. Even when she was tired. Even when she was sick. She stayed. When Andrea stepped down, the courtroom didn't move for a moment. People sat frozen with the weight of what they'd heard. The story Valerie tried to sell, grandmother as villain, had collapsed under the simple truth of three voices who had lived the reality. Judge Mason leaned back in his chair, hands folded. His tired eyes looked even more tired now, but not from boredom. From the burden of judging pain. He turned to Valerie. Mrs. Valerie Vance, he said, you have heard your children. Valerie stood as if her body didn't know how anymore. Your Honor, she pleaded. I was sick. I was young. I didn't. Judge Mason cut her off, not harshly, but firmly. Illness may explain absence, he said. But it does not explain 13 years of no effort. And it certainly does not explain threats tied to inheritance. Sullivan rose. Your Honor, my client is willing to accept a structured visitation plan, supervised. Judge Mason raised a hand. The court will determine what is appropriate based on the children's welfare, not bargaining. Then he faced me again. Mrs. Vance, he said, you requested a restraining order and confirmation of guardianship. Are you still requesting that? Yes, I said quietly. Because stability is what they deserve. Judge Mason looked down at the papers on his desk, letters, photos, guardianship records, printed threats, and the renunciation. Then he looked up again, his gaze steady. This court recognizes, he said, that children are not property. They are not trophies. They are not financial instruments. They are human beings. Valerie's face twisted in anguish. Judge Mason continued, the evidence presented indicates prolonged abandonment, a voluntary statement relinquishing parental responsibility, and a recent attempt to reclaim custody coinciding with an inheritance. He turned to Valerie's counsel. Counsel, Do you have any admissible evidence showing consistent attempts at contact or support over the last 13 years? Sullivan's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes dropped to his file. He flipped pages he already knew were empty of what the judge was asking for. "No, Your Honor," he said finally, voice tight. The courtroom didn't gasp. It didn't need to. That single sentence carried the weight of 13 years. Judge Mason nodded slowly, like a man accepting a sad conclusion he had hoped would be different. "Given the evidence," he said, "this court is prepared to issue its ruling." Valerie's breath came quick and shallow. She clutched the edge of the table. Judge Mason lifted his gavel, but he didn't strike yet. He looked at me, then at my grandchildren, then back at Valerie, and when he spoke, his voice was deliberate, careful, final. "This court confirms the continuing guardianship of Mrs. Eleanor Vance over Andrea Vance, a minor," he said. "Emily Vance is of age and may choose her own residence and contact. Arthur Vance is of age and independent." Valerie made a small sound, like she was losing something she'd assumed she could reclaim by force. "Additionally," the judge continued, "this court issues a protective order prohibiting Mrs. Valerie Vance from contacting Mrs. Eleanor Vance or Andrea Vance for a period of 5 years, except through lawful counsel and only if the court approves." Valerie shook her head violently, tears flying. "No, please." Judge Mason's voice stayed steady. "This order is not punishment," he said. "It is protection. The children have expressed fear of abandonment and manipulation. Their welfare is paramount." He finally struck the gavel, the sound echoing like the first one had, deep, decisive. Valerie crumpled into her chair. Sullivan placed a hand on her shoulder, but his posture suggested not comfort, damage control. Then Arthur stood. "Your Honor," he said, voice clear, "may I say something for the record?" Judge Mason hesitated, then nodded. Briefly. Arthur stepped forward, shoulders straight, eyes bright with contained emotion. "I want it on record," he said, "that my sisters and I do not consider Valerie Vance our mother in the way that matters. She is the woman who gave birth to us. But our mother, the one who raised us, protected us, loved us, has been Eleanor Vance." Valerie sobbed louder, but Arthur didn't stop. "If Valerie ever truly changes," he added, "if she ever comes back without demands, without threats, without money involved, then maybe, we can decide as adults what relationship is possible. But she will never be able to rewrite our childhood. She will never be able to claim a title she didn't earn." Emily rose beside him, and then Andrea too, the three of them standing together in front of the bench like a wall made of truth. Emily's voice was quiet but firm. "I don't hate you," she said toward Valerie. "But I don't know you. And I won't let anyone force me to pretend." Andrea looked Valerie in the eyes. "If you came back for love," she said, "maybe we could have built something. But you came back for money. And that tells me everything I need to know right now." Judge Mason struck the gavel once more. "This matter is concluded," he said. People began to move. Papers gathered. Chairs scraped. But for a moment, time stood still for me. Valerie looked up at me with a face that was no longer angry, no longer polished, no longer legal. It was just broken. "Mom," she whispered, "will you ever forgive me?" I walked toward her slowly, my arthritis forgotten under the weight of everything else. I touched her cheek, and her skin was wet with tears, just like when she was a little girl. "I forgave you for being young and overwhelmed," I said softly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I can let you hurt them again." Her lips trembled. "What am I supposed to do now?" "You're supposed to live with the consequences," I said, not cruelly, but honestly. "And if you want to be different, then become different, without using them as a way to fix your life." The judge's voice echoed again. "Court is adjourned." And as my grandchildren gathered around me in the hallway, arms wrapping around my shoulders, I felt something strange inside me. Not triumph, not vengeance, just relief. The kind of relief you feel when you've been holding your breath for 13 years and finally Finally you can breathe. But the story didn't end there. Because even after a ruling, even after a restraining order, even after truth wins in a courtroom, a family still has to live in the aftermath. And the aftermath is where love and boundaries get tested the most. 3 months after the ruling, the house sounded different. It wasn't quieter. Andrea still practiced guitar, and Emily still talked to herself when she read, and Arthur still played music too loud when he came home from college on weekends, but the silence underneath the noise was gone. That old, hidden silence that lived in the corners of every room, the one that whispered, "Someone could come and take this away." That silence had been replaced by something steadier. A kind of earned calm. In the afternoon, lightest with winter sun, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and watched Andrea practice a song for her school recital. She kept restarting the same tricky part until she got it right. Each time she failed, she didn't break. She tried again. That stubbornness had once reminded me too much of Valerie. Now it reminded me of survival. Arthur was away at college on a scholarship we'd fought for, and Emily worked part-time at a bookstore while finishing her first year of studies. Every time she came home, she carried a book like armor, as if pages could protect her from feelings she didn't want to name. And me, I continued living the way I'd always lived. Meal plans, doctor appointments, school meetings, laundry folded with tired hands. But now I did it without the constant tension in my spine. The restraining order didn't heal everything. It didn't erase Andrea's fear of being left. It didn't remove the empty space in Emily's memories where a mother should have been. It didn't fix the way Arthur sometimes went silent in the middle of laughter, like something inside him had abruptly remembered a childhood scene he didn't want to see. But it did one important thing. It gave them peace. 4 weeks after the trial, my grandchildren slept better than they had in years. Even Andrea, who pretended she didn't care, stopped waking up in the night to check the door locks. Emily stopped jumping at every unknown phone call. Arthur stopped scanning every room like he was counting exits. And I told myself that was enough. Then one evening, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Elmer Jensen, my neighbor, my friend, and the judge's sister. She stood on my porch holding a tray covered in foil, and the smell of warm food drifted into the cold air. "Tamales," she said with her familiar smile, as if comfort could be carried in a dish. "You've been through too much to eat alone." I let her in, and as we sat at the kitchen table with coffee and quiet, she looked at me the way people look when they have news they don't want to deliver. "Just say it," I told her gently. "I've known you for 40 years. Elmer sighed. "It's Valerie," she admitted. A knot formed in my stomach so quickly it felt automatic. Even after everything, my body still reacted to her name like it was bracing for impact. "My brother told me," Elmer continued, "she's been asking about appeal options." My hands tightened around my mug. "And what did he tell her?" "That she has no grounds," Elmer said. "That the evidence was overwhelming. That the protective order stands." "But Eleanor," she hesitated. "There's more." I waited. Elmer's voice lowered. "Javier left her last week." The news hit me harder than I expected. Not because I cared about Javier. He was a shadow in our lives, a name that had shaped decisions from a distance, but because I knew what that meant for Valerie. Valerie had never learned how to stand without leaning on someone else. "He took their son," Elmer said quietly. "Paul. And he said some cruel things. He blamed her for losing money. He called her foolish." I stared down at my cup as if the coffee could hide my thoughts. A part of me felt nothing but a cold, justified numbness. Another part, older, softer, maternal, felt something like grief. "Where is she now?" I asked. Elmer's eyes flicked up in surprise. "Downtown," she said. "A small apartment. She's working at night cleaning offices. Theodore says she looks terrible." Andrea had stopped practicing. She stood at the edge of the doorway listening, face serious. "Are you talking about my biological mother?" she asked. I didn't lie. "Yes," I said. "It seems she's struggling." Andrea walked in slowly and sat beside me. "Do you feel bad for her?" The question wasn't childish. It was sharp and mature in a way that made my chest ache. Yes, I admitted. I do. She's still my daughter. I don't like knowing she's suffering. Andrea's eyes searched mine. But feeling bad doesn't mean we did something wrong, right? I reached for her hand. No, I said firmly. You can have compassion for someone and still protect yourself from them. Elma watched us with a quiet expression, then added, she's also been asking about you. Not contacting you. Not breaking the order. But asking neighbors how you're doing. A flicker of alarm moved through me. Do you think she's planning something? Elma shook her head slowly. I don't know. Theodore wanted you to be aware. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft sounds of my house settling. In the past, Valerie's name would have filled me with fury. Now it filled me with something worse, a complicated sadness that wouldn't stay in one place. I thought of her alone in a small apartment. I thought of her being spoken to cruelly by a man she'd built her life around. I thought of the words she'd written 13 years ago, I have my own family now, and how quickly family can become conditional when it was built on convenience instead of loyalty. And I told myself, not my problem. But then I pictured Valerie hungry. I pictured her thin, ashamed, surrounded by unpaid bills. And no matter how hard I tried, my heart refused to become the kind of heart that could ignore hunger. The next morning, I went to the supermarket. I bought rice, beans, chicken, bread, milk, vegetables, simple things, practical things. A week of food. Not charity. Not forgiveness. Just survival. Andrea watched me pack the bags into the car. Where are you going? She asked. I hesitated, because saying it out loud made it real. I'm going to see Valerie, I said. Andrea's face tightened, but she didn't argue. Do you want me to come? No, I answered gently. This isn't for you. This is something I have to do because I'm her mother. I drove downtown with my hands locked on the steering wheel, my mind full of arguments against myself. She threatened you. She tried to take them. She came back for money. And still, the bags of groceries sat in the passenger seat like a silent decision that couldn't be undone. The building was older than mine, the stairwell smelling of dust and old paint. I climbed slowly, my knees complaining, and stopped at apartment 3B. I knocked. Footsteps dragged toward the door. A pause. Who is it? Valerie's voice sounded thin through the wood. It's me, I said. Your mother. Silence. Then the bolts clicked one by one, slow and cautious. The door opened, and for a moment I didn't recognize the woman in front of me. Valerie's face looked smaller, sharper. Her cheeks were hollow. Dark circles ringed her eyes. Her clothes were clean but worn, the kind of worn that comes from repeated washing and not enough replacements. She stared at me like she couldn't decide if I was real. Mom, she whispered. What are you doing here? I lifted the grocery bags. I brought you some things, I said. May I come in? She stepped aside automatically, like her body remembered manners even when her mind was drowning. The apartment was small but tidy. An old sofa. A small table with 2 chairs. A stack of unpaid bills. The air smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and loneliness. I set the bags in her kitchen. Valerie sank onto the sofa as if her legs had forgotten how to hold her. Then she broke. Tears spilled out of her, silent at first, then shaking, then desperate. I lost everything, she choked. Javier took Paul. He said I ruined everything. That I had easy money and threw it away. I sat beside her. Not too close. Not too far. A distance that respected the restraining order in spirit, even if not in legal detail. A distance that said, I am here, but I am not rescuing you back into old patterns. And what did you tell him? I asked. Valerie laughed bitterly through tears. Nothing. Because he was right. I'm a loser. I turned my face toward her fully. Valerie, I said, voice steady. You didn't lose those children. You abandoned them. There's a difference. Her head snapped up, eyes red. You're always going to throw that at me. I'm not throwing it, I replied. I'm refusing to let you rewrite history. If you want to change, you have to start with the truth. Valerie looked away, trembling. I live with guilt every day. Guilt is useless, I said softly. It can turn into self-pity. What matters is what you do now. She wiped her face roughly. What do you want from me? I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street, because sometimes it's easier to speak hard truths when you're not staring into someone's eyes. I want you to stop building your life around men, I said. Stop letting their demands decide your morality. Stop using children as proof that you're not broken. Stop using money as a bandage for shame. Valerie's voice cracked. Is there any way I can ever meet them again? The question landed heavy. Maybe, I answered honestly. But it won't be on your terms. It won't be on a schedule you control. It will be if they want it, when they're ready, if they're ever ready. Valerie covered her face again. I don't even know how to begin. Begin with yourself, I said. Get therapy. Keep a job. Learn to live without leaning on someone who controls you. Become stable for your own sake, not because you're trying to win someone back. I walked toward the door. The food will last you a week, I said. After that, you'll have to manage. This is not me taking responsibility for you again. This is me refusing to let my daughter go hungry. Valerie looked up, eyes wide with something like childlike hope. Will you visit again? I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I don't know, I said truthfully. That depends on what you do next. When I stepped back into the stairwell, I felt strange, like I had done something kind and dangerous at the same time. Kind, because hunger should never be a punishment. Dangerous, because kindness can be mistaken for permission. When I got home, Arthur was in the kitchen at the table, books open, pencil in hand. He looked up, eyebrows drawn together. Grandma, he said, where were you? I didn't lie. I went to see Valerie, I replied. His face tightened instantly. Why? Because she's hungry, I said. And she's still my daughter. Arthur closed his book slowly. Does that mean you're going to let her back in? No, I said firmly. It means I can feel compassion without compromising your safety. He studied me, then nodded once, slowly, as if accepting the difference even if he didn't like it. Do you think she'll ever really change? He asked. I looked past him toward the hallway, toward Andrea's room, toward Emily's books, toward the life we'd built. I don't know, I said. But if she does, it will be because she chooses to. Not because we save her. That night, I lay in bed again, listening to my house breathe, and I realized something I had never understood when Valerie was young. Love isn't only warmth. Sometimes love has boundaries. Sometimes love is saying no and meaning it, even when your heart aches. Sometimes love is giving someone the dignity of consequences while still refusing to become cruel. And as I drifted into sleep, I knew the hardest part wasn't the courtroom. The hardest part was living afterward, holding compassion in one hand and protection in the other. And not letting either one slip. A year passes quietly, the way healing often does. Not with announcements, not with grand changes, but with small shifts that only become visible when you look back and realize how far you've come. Spring arrives gently that year. I plant tomatoes in the small garden behind the house, kneeling carefully so my knees don't complain too much. The soil is cool and dark, and as I press the seedlings into the earth, I think about roots. How fragile they look at first, how much strength they hide, how much patience they require. Andrea sits nearby with her guitar, plucking at strings while humming to herself. She's grown taller, more confident. The sharp edge of fear that once lived behind her eyes has softened into something steadier. Not trust, not yet, but resilience. Arthur graduates from college that spring. He stands in his cap and gown with a quiet pride that fills my chest until it hurts. He earned his degree with scholarships, late nights, and a discipline that came from knowing no one was coming to rescue him if he failed. When he hugs me afterward, he holds on longer than usual. "This is yours too," he whispers. I shake my head. "It's yours," I tell him. "You did the work." But we both know the truth is more complicated. Success is rarely solitary, no matter how much we like to pretend otherwise. Emily starts her second year of college in the fall. She studies literature and psychology, drawn to stories and minds, to understanding how people survive the things that shape them. She calls me late some nights just to talk, her voice calmer now, less guarded. She no longer apologizes for needing reassurance. Andrea turns 17 and leads her school band in a regional competition. When she steps onto the stage, guitar slung over her shoulder, she looks fearless. Watching her, I realize something important. Children who are protected long enough eventually stop bracing for disaster. They begin to believe the ground will hold. The inheritance remains untouched in trust accounts, waiting patiently for adulthood. It is no longer a source of tension or fear. It has become what it was meant to be, a quiet resource, not a weapon. And Valerie. Valerie does not disappear, but she does not intrude either. Through Elma, I hear fragments. Valerie enrolls in therapy and attends every session without fail. She finds a daytime job as a receptionist at a small medical clinic. It doesn't pay much, but it's steady. She stops cleaning offices at night. She looks healthier, less hollow. She gains weight slowly, the way people do when they start eating regularly and sleeping through the night. She does not ask to see the children. That detail matters more than anything else. When Elma tells me this, something loosens inside my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but cautious acknowledgement. Change, real change, doesn't rush to reclaim what it lost. It learns to live with absence. One afternoon, Andrea comes home quieter than usual. She sets her guitar down carefully and sits across from me at the kitchen table. "Grandma," she says, "can I ask you something?" "Always," I reply. She hesitates, twisting her fingers together. "Do you think, someday, I might want to meet her?" The question doesn't shock me. I've been waiting for it. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "And you don't have to know right now." Andrea nods slowly. "Would you be upset if I did?" I reach across the table and take her hands. "No," I say. "I would be proud of you for making your own choice. And if you decide never to, I'll be proud of that too." She exhales, relief visible in her shoulders. "I just wanted to make sure." Later that night, Emily calls from her dorm. "I've been thinking," she says, voice thoughtful, "about forgiveness." I smile slightly. "That's a dangerous subject in our family." She laughs softly. "I don't think forgiveness means pretending something didn't happen," she says. "I think it means not letting it own you." I close my eyes, letting her words settle. "You're right," I say. "And it also doesn't mean removing boundaries." Arthur, now 21, gains access to his inheritance. The first thing he does is sit me down at the kitchen table with papers in his hand. "I'm setting some aside for you," he says firmly. I protest, of course. I always do. "Grandma," he says gently, "this isn't payment. This is gratitude. And it matters to me that you accept it." So I do. Not because I need the money, but because sometimes receiving is as important as giving. Months later, Elma brings news again. "Valerie asked about the children," she says carefully. My stomach tightens. "What did she ask?" "Just if they're doing well," Elma replies. "She didn't ask to see them. She didn't ask for messages. She just asked if they're okay." That night, I sit alone at the kitchen table long after everyone has gone to bed. I think about Valerie at 26, writing that renunciation. I think about Valerie at 39, standing in a courtroom with nothing left to defend. And I think about Valerie now, working, attending therapy, living small but honest. For the first time in years, I allow myself to consider a future that doesn't require constant vigilance. A few weeks later, I run into Valerie by accident at the grocery store. She freezes when she sees me. For a moment, we just stare at each other across a display of apples, two women bound by history and pain. "Mom," she says quietly. "Valerie," I replied. She looks healthier. Still fragile, but grounded. She doesn't step closer. She doesn't ask for anything. "I just wanted to say," she begins, then stops, swallowing hard. "Thank you. For the food. For not destroying me when you could have." I study her face, searching for the old patterns. They aren't gone, but they're quieter. "I didn't come to destroy you," I say. "I came to protect the children." She nods. "I know that now." We stand there awkwardly, the space between us full of unsaid things. "I'm not asking to see them," she says quickly, as if afraid I'll think she is. "I'm not ready. And I don't think they are either." That honesty matters. "I hope you keep doing the work," I tell her. "I am," she says. "For the first time, I really am." We part without hugs, without promises. It feels right. Life continues. Andrea graduates high school. Emily thrives at college. Arthur builds a career. I grow older slower, but lighter than I've been in years. Sometimes people ask me if I hate Valerie. "No," I say. "I don't hate her. But I don't excuse her. Understanding is not absolution. Compassion is not surrender. Love does not mean access." What I've learned, what my grandchildren have learned, is that true love doesn't abandon, doesn't manipulate, doesn't arrive only when there's something to gain. True love stays. True love protects. True love respects boundaries. And sometimes, true love is quiet. It looks like planting tomatoes. Like attending therapy. Like waiting without demanding. If Valerie ever becomes someone her children choose to know, it will be because she earned that place. Not through biology, not through money, not through courts, but through consistency, humility, and time. Until then, I remain what I have always been. Their grandmother. Their safe place. Their proof that love can be unconditional and firm at the same time. And that, in the end, is enough.